welcome to the Wild Enthusiasm for Living podcast. I am your host, Dr. Melissa Mann. Join me for conversations about possibilities and tools for having more joy, more play, and way more of you. What would it be like to wake up every day with a wild enthusiasm for living? Hello and welcome to the Wild Enthusiasm for a Living podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Mann, and today I have with me Natasha Ramlall. Natasha is an embodied integration coach, and I'm so grateful to have her here today. Welcome, Natasha.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. That intro I could feel myself expanding watching it. It's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. I love that. And that's one of the things you talk about. So I suppose we can kind of dive right in. As you tell me a little bit about what you do as an embodied integration coach. What does that mean? Who do you work with? And let's just start there.
Okay, sounds good. So as an embodied integration coach, I'm really interested in that intersection of all the parts that make us human, right? So we've got the mind that's connected to all our stories, but then we've also got the somatic mapping that's going on in the body, those protective mechanisms from the ego, and then sort of a greater spiritual anchor that kind of drives our purpose and our meaning and holds us through the journey. And so I work with the women that have come into my realm over time have all tended to be of this high functioning, hyper capable profile. And so oftentimes they will have massive self-awareness. They've been doing the work. They understand, a lot of their traumas, a lot of their patterns and things like that. But they've reached a point where things are not moving. They feel like they are kind of ruminating and spiraling on some of the same issues. And so what I'm doing with embodied integration is I'm bringing the body and sort of the embodied processing and somatic piece in, but not completely abandoning the cognitive piece. I think that we have, our more traditional talk therapy and different kinds of healing modalities are often very cognitive. And I still think that there's a lot of value in that. And I do think that when it's strictly cognitive and we don't bring in the body, we are missing something, and we will likely reach a point where we can't go any further until we do integrate the body. But also the women who work with me, because they tend to be very high functioning, will often find it very difficult to come into the body. And that cognitive piece kind of offers the bridge so that we can, meet them where they are, and also at the pace of safety, bring them into a more embodied understanding of their experience. And then, of course, with coaching, ultimately what we're doing is present to forward, present to future focused. So we're really thinking about what is it that you would love to be creating? This is the past, this is what's brought you to where you are, but what is the thing that lights you up? What is the thing that makes you feel expansive, like your introduction did for me just now? What is the thing that you are moving toward creating in your life? And then we can kind of, use that or cultivate that spiritual anchor piece to move us forward closer to that preferred vision. So that's really at the heart of what I'm doing. I offer that through one-to-one coaching, which is global. I'm privileged to be able to work with women from all over, but I also bring that sort of idea of grounded expansion. So kind of grounded in the human experience and also expanding into potential, into more of a spiritual place of growth and creativity. I also bring that into in-person offers, and I facilitate groups in my local community. And so just different iterations of the same important work, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's really beautiful. I really love the way that you explained that. And I think you're right. There is a place for the cognitive piece, but it will only take you so far because we can cognitize something all day long and talk about it to exhaustion. And many times we never get to the way the body's responding, particularly with trauma or with things that were, felt in the body or are nervous system related because that takes place in the body. So even if we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, we never really get to it. And so I love the work that you're doing and the way that you bring the body into it.
Mhm.
Curious, how is it, it's like you talked about, very high functioning, high power women who don't really know how to feel things in their body. They're so in their head and they've sort of gone through life that way. How do you begin to get somebody to drop back into their body? What is maybe the first thing you would help somebody do, or how would you help them to uh, have some more body awareness?
Yeah. I have two pieces that I would consider kind of foundational to the work. And the first one seems so obvious, but it's almost humorous how far some of us have strayed from this very basic practice of breathing, and just sort of getting reacquainted with breath and what it feels like to have a really complete, nourishing, deep inhale and exhale ritual, happening in your body and connecting to that, and sort of opening your awareness around that process, because really that is at the heart of everything, isn't it? It's what connects us to our meditation practices. It's what connects us to mindfulness. It's what connects us to embodied resourcing, which is the second foundational piece, actually. So resourcing, for those who may not be familiar with the term, is a practice of coming into a felt experience of the body and sort of finding a place of ideally safety, stillness, calm. But again, for some people, that may not be accessible right away, and it may just be a place of neutrality, or just a tiny little glimmer that doesn't feel overly activated, and then sort of building that out, allowing that to expand at the pace of safety within the felt experience of the body. And that practice of resourcing, I say, is foundational, because really, when we want to do the work of processing emotional energy that's held in our body due to trauma, due to undigested life experiences, etc., if we don't have a safe anchor to come back into when we're doing that work, we risk re-traumatizing ourselves and just sort of reinforcing some of those thoughts that are keeping us stuck, those limiting beliefs that are keeping us stuck. But when we have that anchor of safety within our own body, completely internally referenced, we can do a lot of healing work from that place. So that is definitely where we're starting. We're starting with the breath. We're starting with resourcing. And again, for some women, that can be very quickly applied. It comes quite easily, quite naturally. And for others, that can take, majority of sessions just to find that feeling of safety within the body, which I'm sure you're familiar in the work that you do as well. It just really depends on our connection relationship to what it feels like to be in our body and the different stories that we hold about the safety of the body. So
Yeah.
those would be my
No, that's
definite starting
wonderful.
point.
If somebody acknowledges maybe they don't feel safe in their body, and it sounds like you'd start with some breath work.
Mhm.
And, as you talk about resourcing, is there, one thing that, people can, even if they're listening to this and they're just trying to like learn what that safety feels like, is there
Mhm.
something that is, maybe something that that they could start with that would help them to feel safer in their body?
Well, actually, I have a tool. I'd love to offer this to your listeners. It's a free guided audio, and it's guided by me. So it's my voice. Your listeners can determine if they feel attuned to my voice or not from the podcast today. And I'm just sort of guiding listeners through this process of kind of landing in the body, becoming aware of different sensations, and just slowly and gently, more from a place of experimentation and curiosity rather than there's a right way to get it done. Just sort of allowing the listener to feel into what that experience of resourcing could look like. And, it varies from day to day as well. So it's one of those resources that you can use and have a slightly different experience every time that you put it on to listen to. So yeah, I think that would be a
Cool.
great starting point for anybody who's interested in learning more about resourcing.
I love that. Thank you so much for that offer. That's wonderful. And we'll put that in the show notes, and listeners can check that out. That's really a beautiful offering, and you have a very soothing voice, so I'm sure that most people will be attuned to that. So
Thank you.
that's lovely. How do you think, I think one of the conversations that I have with people is that they don't even realize that they're not in their body or that they are functioning primarily from their mind. How would you what does it look like, I guess, if somebody isn't really embodied or they're not really functioning from um their sort of whole sense of embodiment? What are some
Mhm.
signals that maybe people could look for to see if that's true for them?
Yeah. So I can speak to when I'm in a session with a client and we're trying to feel into the body, and I'll ask questions or give them prompts, and oftentimes we'll get, it's almost like they are jumping on to the first story that pops in to escape the practice of actually being with what it is that they're feeling. And so as soon as, all of a sudden this exploration into the sensations in the body turns into this explanation of why they think they're feeling this. Or I think this is because I think is a big
Yeah.
sign. I should. That's another big sign that we're kind of caught up in story, or there's sort of an inner judge or a critic that's piping in and giving us an explanation of what we're feeling. And instead of actually being in the sensation of feeling it. So you'll get a lot of, adjectives that are more describing emotions from a cognitive place, right? Like, how does it feel? It feels, um, I feel, I'm trying to think of an example of an emotional word that isn't really sensation. Like,
Yeah,
I
feel
think I feel,
tired or something like that.
yeah, maybe tired, and we can kind of go further down and say, okay, what does tired feel like in your body? Like, what is it about the sensation that makes you feel that you're tired?
Hmm.
Um, and so, we're really kind of trying to separate out what a feeling actually feels like as a physical sensation in the body versus what we believe, the meaning making that we have adopted about what that must feel like. It's a really strange but very common pattern that we have, where we've already pre-decided or predetermined or pre-understood something, and so the main red flag is that they're not in the present moment, but they're reflecting on a past understanding, or again, sort of dissociating from the body and jumping up into a story and letting that take over. Um, and yeah, it's I'm unfortunately in the annoying role of bringing them back to the body, and helping them to notice that pattern of jumping out and attaching to a story, or letting a thought become the main driver and kind of, letting themselves get out of their physical experience. Um, and so yeah, it's this practice of, okay, but that's a story. Let's come back into the body. What does it actually feel like?
Yeah. No, and that's awesome. And a lot of people, I think, don't realize when they are sort of living from story or living from or might think, this sort of thought process rather than, being really present with what is actually true now in the moment. And it sounds like that's one of the things that you really help people to learn, is how to be present in their body in the moment
Mm,
and get what's true for them right now, rather than sort of the stories that they've been living from or telling themselves or regurgitating over and over again, rather
right.
than actually being present. I'm so curious, what made you get into this work? What kind of
Mm.
led you here to say this is a piece of the world that is not being utilized, and I want to help women with this. What led you here?
It's interesting is trying to figure out the path that gets us to where we are. It's very rarely linear, so sometimes it's hard to kind of trace all the little loops
Fair.
and dilly dallies that got you to where you are. But I can say that this this idea of coming out of a transition, like a major life transition, and experiencing incredible disorientation, at which I am using the term identity rupture to describe, because rupture is a strong enough uh, image to encompass how incredibly disorienting and debilitating that can feel. That idea of identity rupture has kind of been a through line in my work for a very long time. I spent over 20 years working with adult newcomers and refugees to Canada. We were learning English, and we were dealing with settlement. And so that identity rupture piece was a huge part of the experience of these students that I was working with. And then in my own life, experiencing my own identity rupture and sort of the messy experience of that. And then seeing this theme in the women who end up in my realm and working with me one to one. There is this common thread of losing yourself and all of the fear and all of the beliefs that hold us back in that moment where we're kind of stuck between what was, and it's no longer true for us, but it's the only, um, you know, the relationships with people and jobs and places and situations, those are the only things we have to define ourselves. And so letting go of that to make room for something new is an incredibly frightening process. And so it can really help to have somebody walk through that process with you, witnessing and assuring you that everything that you're experiencing is completely okay. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing to feel weak or flawed for experiencing. And what I've actually come to find is that in all cases, this identity rupture, despite being painful, challenging, disorienting, and all the things, is always an invitation into reconnecting with trust. So, self-trust that we're going to get through this, and trust in the journey, that everything is going to work out in some way, shape, or form. And sort of like a soul trust, like trusting that there is something greater that's holding you through the experience, even though it may feel like you're alone. You're never really alone if you have that spiritual anchor to lean into in those moments where it feels really challenging, really contracted, and maybe heavy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love what you said about that identity rupture, and that is often the thing. It sounds like that people are really finding you in those states in their
Mm,
lives where everything is different and everything has changed. And yet, when we have those sort of moments, we don't even, it's like we don't know who we are, because it's like we had this way that we defined ourselves, and when that goes away or something moves enough that we can no longer define ourselves that way, we don't know which way is up, we don't know which way to turn. It's very disorienting, and it sounds like that's one of the things you really help people through. So what I understand the refugee part of it, people moving to a new country, learning a new language, that's a really
mhm.
big identity rupture. Are there some things that maybe aren't that that are still, that you would still define as an identity rupture, just so people might have an understanding of what that could look like in their lives?
Yeah, I think that the main defining factor is that piece that you just outlined, where you don't recognize yourself and you don't have anything certain um, pointing you in a particular direction moving forward, because all of the things that you were relying on to help you understand your place in your life and what it's meant to look like, and potentially what the future is supposed to unfold looking like, all of that gets shifted or gone, or a big piece of it is gone in some way. Um, and so, yeah, I think that in those moments, we can often either rush into something to fill that place and help us buffer that discomfort. And that's often the way that, particularly for high functioning women, that's often what we'll do. We'll push, we'll get even more productive, and we'll try to, kind of force something in place to get us out of that discomfort of, I don't know where I am. I don't have an anchor right now. But I think that that's not sustainable. And so a lot of times we'll reach a point where that habit of forcing and pushing just doesn't work anymore. And, what happened to me in my own experience, shifting careers was a big one for me. I actually, kind of went into a functional freeze for a while. And my whole system was just like, okay, like, slow down a second. You can't just keep pushing yourself at the same, with the same force, and never just stop and slow down and recognize that change isn't just about the external environment, but it's also about that internal transformation. And that requires time, and it requires space and grace and patience. And if you let yourself take that time, you will have the opportunity to build the next thing from a place that's so much stronger, so much more authentic, so much more rooted in purpose and joy that feels sustainable. And so, for me, again, back to trust, it was really a matter of believing that it was okay for me to not be productive. It was okay for me to have some time where it looked like my life was stalled, or, things were just not moving at the pace that I was used to. And to be okay with that, and to recognize this is actually a really necessary part of the process, because letting go of those old defining relationships and factors, that is not just a simple matter of, okay, I can drop that now. There is so much tied up into that version of our identity that it feels, life or death level threatening to
Sure.
let go of those connections. So that requires time, and that requires, in a lot of cases, support. And it requires, again, back to trust. It requires a trust that this part of my journey is going to be hard, but it's going to be really good. It has the potential to become something really, really good. And so just holding on to the hope that, on the other side of this, there is a greater purpose that may not be clear to me yet, but inevitably I'm here in this life experience to be moving forward, right? I'm a human. I'm meant to expand and grow, and we can't expand and grow if we just, lock in and stay in the same containers that we've created for ourselves in past versions of our life.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And thank you for sharing your own, process and experience with that also, because I think that's where people, there's such a, when everything changes, there's like this need to like push harder and, go more and figure it out faster. There's so little space, I think, in our society to slow down and to be present and trust the process.
Mhm.
And you've talked a lot about trust and, what that actually, is of sort of knowing and trusting that everything will ultimately turn out greater and will work out. And when you're in that space of fight or flight or freeze, as you talked about, there is a hard space of like, but how do I know? But how do I know? What if it all falls apart? Or, what if I can't recover from this or whatever that is?
That's
And,
right.
it sounds like that's really what you help people do, is to be comfortable in that space, to come back to their body, to really, um, to give themselves grace in those moments. And, you've talked a little bit sort of about the spiritual piece of things and this trust. Do you find that most of the women that are coming to you already have a spiritual practice? Is that something that you're helping them build? Like, what does that look like?
It varies quite a bit, but what I am finding, and I think this is a very fair thing to say, I am feeling and I am seeing and I'm experiencing in my own life that this sort of massive shift, like there's this collective shift, particularly with women, who have tried a different way, coming into sort of a reclaiming of their joy and a reclaiming of their right to live their life on their terms. And I really feel like there is a deeper reason we kind of experience that drive and that catalyst for change. And I think it's because when we lean into our joy and we give ourselves permission to create a life that's based in joy and purpose, it naturally brings us into a more spiritual understanding of our experience. They kind of like one and the same, they go together. And I feel like we're at a time in humanity right now where this is happening at mass scale. And I think that this is orchestrated for a reason. Like there's a shift happening right now. And that's why I feel like the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing and the work that so many incredible women that I've been meeting are doing is so important, because we're really helping to usher this new energy along and, create a wave of women who are showing up differently in their own lives and then rippling that out into all of their circles and all of the people that they care for and love and influence, and it's, so whether they come to me very explicitly aware of their spiritual center, or whether that's not really on their radar, inevitably it somehow kind of pops up. And I do hold the belief that the majority of the problems that we experience in our human lives are connected to a lack of a spiritual anchor. And I think that can really be an incredibly helpful piece for most challenges that we experience as humans. And that's not to say that that's tied to any one particular religion or any particular way of understanding spirituality. It's more just a connection and a trust that there is a reason for this messy up and down that we're going through, and for some people that can look a lot more scientific. For some people that can be a lot more creative. It could be wrapped up in their art form that they love, or their sport that they're, that they can engage in and be in that feeling of flow, or a connection to nature. There's so many different ways to find that anchor. But I think that when we don't have it, it can really leave a hole, and we try to fill that hole with a lot of things that can be problematic, and sort of lead us off the path to feeling healthy mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, beautiful. No, that's wonderful. And I love that concept of, even if people didn't start there, as they kind of are on a self-discovery journey, often they do find some type of spiritual practice, even if they all look different. It isn't, there's a right way so much as to acknowledge that there's something greater than yourself and to have a connection with, the divine and whatever that might be, whether that's earth, whether that's nature, whether that's God, or angels or spirit guides, or wherever people land, that does create some sense of safety and of feeling that gets rid of that feeling of, loneliness, or not, or of kind of going the path alone, and
Right.
realizing when people get to that space of like, I'm not alone, and there really are benevolent forces at play, and it does create something. So I love that. That's really beautiful. And as we finish up here, I'm wondering, um, is there anything, I suppose, that you'd like our listeners to know, um, as we finish up this episode today?
Hmm. I think, just sort of tying all of the loose ends of our conversation together, that I really do feel like we're at a moment in our collective evolution of humanity where it's a beautiful time to sort of give yourself permission to explore what it is about you that is unique, what it is about you that experiences joy and pleasure, what gives you a feeling of vibrancy. What does it feel like in your body when you feel excited and inspired and expansive versus um, just sort of living in that autopilot default setting of like a heavier, just kind of, wake up, go through the day, do the 9 to 5, da 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 da. And, you know, this is a time where there are so many resources to open up to our agency and our power in creating something where we're excited to wake up. We're excited and grateful to step into our human experience. It doesn't mean every day is full of joy and daisies and happy experiences, for sure. That's definitely not the case. But when we can be in sort of the darker, more challenging experiences with more presence, it naturally allows us to experience the more expansive and vibrant and joyful feelings with more presence as well. And I think that is a really great orientation to life in general. And so for all the listeners, go out and find your joy. Like, let's get on it. This is your life, and you deserve to live it, to the greatest that you have the capacity for.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Natasha, for being on. And how can our listeners find you? Is there, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way is just my website. Yeah, if you jump on my website, it's humanistcoaching.ca. And that is, access to all of the things that I'm up to. If you're interested in more of what I'm up to locally, or if you'd like to work with me and you're not in Ontario, you can find everything you need there. I think that's the easiest way.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. We'll also have that in the show notes. And thank you for being on, and thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.